Hello and welcome to Sportsroom, our weekly show on all things sport. I'm Anirudh Madhavan, and with me is veteran journalist Ayaz Memon. Now, for the handful of you who don't know him, Ayaz has not only had a stellar print career for more than 4 decades, but has also easily transitioned into the social media age. Having covered multiple global events across sports, including several cricket World Cups, Ayaz has now come on board as the week's sports consultant. Oh, also, he was one of the very few people who saw Kapil Dev's heroic 175 against Zimbabwe in the 1983 World Cup live. But we'll save the memories for that on a later episode. Right now, for this first episode, our discussion is on a topic that every cricket fan has an opinion on, the spirit of the game. So to set the stage, this is the Ashes' second test. Johnny Bairstow's batting, Cameron Green bowls him a bumper, he ducks it, ball goes through to Alex Carey. Johnny Bairstow strolls down the wicket because he thinks the over is done and it's a dead ball. It wasn't. Carey underarms the ball, hits the wicket, he's out. So now this rekindled the whole debate about spirit of the game, with both Prime Ministers of Australia and Britain joining the conversation. The Australians were called cheats, the English were called crybabies. So we are at the point where the whole thing has been blown out of proportion. So my question to you, Ayaz, right now is, it's a very serious question. So what is the spirit of the game? Is it whiskey, is it rum, or is it vodka?
Anirudh, first of all, thank you very much for those kind words and introduction. And I'm obviously delighted to be part of the team that the week has put up for covering sports. I think it's a fantastic endeavor, and sports is becoming so big globally and certainly in India. So I'm really enjoying it already. Now, coming to the spirit of cricket battle or the debate which is raging, I think it's really a conflict between the spirit of cricket and the laws of cricket. If there was, the whole tamasha that has been going on since Johnny Bairstow's dismissal, and you mentioned right up to the prime ministers of the two countries getting involved, former players, and so on. In fact, the whole world, and it just polarized cricket lovers all over the world. And what is at the core of it? Is it the spirit of cricket which should prevail over everything else, or should it be the laws of cricket? I think that is the essential debate, and that's the conflict which is going on. And in my opinion, I think, look, spirit of cricket is highly desirable. You want sport to be played in the right spirit, but if that was so easy to do, then why have laws of cricket? Why have the laws of cricket come into being? Why is there something known as a dead ball, or over is called a no ball, and so on and so forth? The fact that laws of cricket evolved over time, and they've changed also, as we know. There was the underarm incident involving Trevor Chappell when Australia were playing New Zealand in an ODI game. Greg Chappell was the captain. That was not outside the laws of the game. It was certainly out of the spirit of the game. And therefore, the law had to be changed. But finally, in that incident, the law prevailed. And therefore, over here, in my opinion, Johnny Bairstow, much as it looked, it looked kind of, it looked a little irksome when you see the match, and I've seen many replays. It seems that, maybe he's gone and marked his crease again, and he's just kind of ventured out thinking that the ball is dead. But thinking and believing is not really what happens. A day or two earlier, if you remember, in the same test match, Mitchell Starc thought that he had taken a clean catch. And, a diving catch in third man position, if I remember correctly. And then replay showed that he had not completed the catch, the ball had touched the ground. And therefore, the decision went against the Aussies. This decision, when you look back, ultimately it's in one motion that Alex Carey does that. He's not waiting for him to leave the crease. It's one sequence of actions that takes place, and Johnny Bairstow unfortunately finds himself out of the crease. And therefore, by the laws of cricket, he's certainly out. The spirit of cricket, you can debate till kingdom come. But as I mentioned earlier, why have the laws of cricket if you think that everything can be decided by the spirit of cricket? And then who will decide? Because the spirit of cricket is really a subjective interpretation of how the game should be played, or what should be ethos of the game. If it was as simple as that, we would never have had the laws.
So you mentioned this, there was no, let's say, treachery involved with that. Alex Carey, he just did it in one motion. So there are others, like for example, if you say, and we can't have a discussion about ethics in cricket without mentioning Ravichandran Ashwin. So he also weighed in on the issue. He supported Australia, and he said that's the law. And he also said that there must have been a pattern of Bairstow doing this for a team to take advantage of this. So with Ashwin and the whole Mankad situation, what's your take on that?
I think by now it's fairly well established that, and especially now, see what used to happen, and I just want to give it a little perspective, because ever since Ashwin went public with his opinion, and he actually executed it on the field also, as we know, is that most of us in our formative years, not you, not young guys like you, you're seeing it all with 28, 33, 40 cameras, slow-mos, multiple replays, and almost to a nanosecond you are seeing the action or the sequence of things as they happen on the field. When we were growing up and watching the match from the stadium, from the stands, or even from the press box, where there was no television or there were no replays and not so many angles, you believed what you saw and what the umpire interpreted. Now I must give you, it's also how the players interpreted it themselves. The second test match which I saw in my life, 1966, West Indies versus India, was at the Bradman Stadium. Sir Garfield Sobers, the greatest cricketer that ever lived in my opinion, was captaining the West Indies. He was standing in the leg trap. Lance Gibbs, the off-spinner, was bowling, and Budhi Kundran was the Indian batsman, wicket-keeper batsman in those days. And he kind of, as you play to an off-spinner, he edged it into the leg trap. Sobers took the catch, scooped the catch up, threw it in the air. The umpire gave Budhi Kundran out. Budhi Kundran started walking back to the pavilion, and Sobers called him back, saying that I've taken it on the half volley. I haven't taken it cleanly. And I was maybe 9 years, maybe 10 years old then. And that remained embedded in my life. And I said, wow, this is what cricket is about. The fairness of Sobers in that situation. Why would you not want a wicket? Why would you not want to win a match? The West Indies went on to win the match because the next day Sobers came and smashed a half century, and he was very fond of horse racing, and he wanted to go to the Mahalakshmi races, so he came and smashed a half century and finished the match in good time. So he saw the races and he won the match. But what remained embedded in my mind was how he played his cricket. Now, what has happened is there are multiple dimensions to every situation, every action that takes place on the field. At that time, you believe Sobers. In 1979-80, you might remember this, Gundappa Vishwanath recalled Bob Taylor in the Jubilee Test against England. England were tottering, I think 48 for 5 or something, edged behind. Umpire gave Bob Taylor out. Bob Taylor shook his head, not even really vehemently, just said no. And Vishwanath was first slip. Kirmani was the wicket keeper. I think Vishwanath went up to Kirmani, asked him, what do you think, got an edge or not? I think Kirmani perhaps said, I'm not sure, whatever it was. Vishwanath called Bob Taylor back. Bob Taylor and Ian Botham put on a massive partnership, and India got stuffed. But again, what one saw in that match was, or what one experienced was, if you're, this is what you call about the spirit of cricket and the fairness that came through very clearly, and one admired Vishwanath for doing it because that seemed just the right thing to do. The world has changed. The way people watch cricket, the way people associate themselves with cricket, the passion and the sentiments that people have with how every action transpires in the middle has changed. And certainly technology has played a big role. If a batsman is taking the advantage of even a couple of inches leaving the crease to get an advantage to reach the other side, then I think Ashwin is absolutely right.
On camera.
Ashwin is absolutely right. Why shouldn't he, make sure that that advantage is not taken off?
Exactly. So, from what I remember, to age myself, was the famous situation of Dhoni calling back Ian Bell. So
yes, that was there. That was one of the Tent Bridge, if I remember correctly. Tent Bridge 2011.
Yeah. So that was the more recent famous one. But I also, again, coming back to Ashwin, I remember a match in which I think it was an ODI against Sri Lanka, where he monked it, the non-striker, and then he asked the umpire. Umpire was flummoxed for a moment, but then Sehwag, I think, was stand-in captain, and he came up to him and they recalled it. So that was when Ashwin maybe didn't have the sort of say that he now has. So, but this has been happening. So one point that you raised about, and this is a question I've had for a long time. So is it up to an individual? So let's say the team, do you think in your experience the team talks about this stuff, how you're going to behave on field? So I'll give you an example. Like Sachin Tendulkar used to walk. Even
Yes.
before the umpire gave him out, he knew he was out and he walked. But it may be sacrilegious to say this, but was he hurting his team's chances by walking?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting and relevant question. And I think in a sense, you've also provided the answer. I think it depends on the individual or what the team thinks about certain situations. So I would say that the laws should be paramount, but you don't discard the spirit of cricket completely. If you want to, if you believe as a player that, for instance, if a batsman is leaving the crease, the non-striker, and the bowler is without warning running him out, the convention has been so far, or was, that you give the batsman a warning. That was in the spirit of things.
Warning, yeah.
And then if he didn't behave himself, then you ran him out. Now, it's up to the player that, I think that maybe something in my approach to the wicket has kind of misled the batsman, if he believes that. But the batsman still has no right to leave the pitch, because his job is to focus on where the bat is in the crease, and then make sure that he's not caught on the wrong foot, so to speak. So I think it's really an individual thing, or maybe a collective thing as the team wants to play. But as we've seen in this recent conflict, there is no unanimity, Anirudh. We've seen so many old videos of England which have surfaced, including the English coach, current English coach, of Brendan McCullam, doing pretty much the same thing. Of Johnny Bairstow himself as a young player for Yorkshire, pulling off a stumping, where it almost seems he's waiting for the batsman to kind of lift his foot.
Then, I saw that.
So maybe it's a tactical ploy. You watch it for a few balls and you say, hey, you have in fact a confabulation, and tell the bowler, this is what he's been doing repeatedly. He kind of drags his foot out of the crease, or he lifts his foot. So if you beat him next time, I'm going to stump him. And that's legitimate. That's in the laws. You can stump. So the debate is... The debate is not black and white as has been made out to be. I think some of these things which have, in fact, what I think is that the debate has marked. Otherwise, the series was being played in great spirit. Now this is kind of thrown a kind of a hand grenade into the whole situation. But I think all said and done, as I mentioned, the conflict is between the spirit of cricket and the laws of cricket. And if there are the laws of cricket as defined by the MCC, and the MCC is still the custodian of the law, if something is completely antithetical to the spirit of cricket, then change the law, like they did in the case of the underarm. But when if it is in the laws of the game, then you can't say that spirit of cricket shall override it.
Exactly. So that's my theory is that, like, what is within the spirit of the game is very subjective. It is shaped by where you come from, your country, the whole cricketing ethos of that fraternity. So an Australian might have a different take on the spirit of the game, as would an Indian, as would an Englishman. And if MCC being the custodian, as you pointed out, so these are laws, at least not the upgraded ones, the earlier ones, they are laws made by an elite group of gentlemen who, for the longest time, didn't even allow others to play the game. It was a very, like, a boys' club sort of thing. So how do you expect someone who's coming from, like, across oceans to know what your sensibility of the game is and to adhere to that? So when you have something as subjective as the spirit of the game, but you have a written law that says this is what you can and cannot do, would it not be prudent to just stick to the law?
No, I mean, it's not just prudent. I think it is imperative in many ways. I mean, you don't have to violate the spirit of the game pointlessly or needlessly or for the heck of it, or just to kind of establish some poppycock belief that you may have. That's not what needs to be done. But you need to adhere to the laws of the game. Otherwise, the players can run amok. Imagine if you didn't have the laws of the game actively pursued, then you could run amok. So I mean, spirit of the game, yes, you don't want to see two people indulging in fisticuffs over a disputed decision. That violates the spirit of the game. Incidentally, since you raised the spirit of the game and England and Lords, I must share this little anecdote with you. I know we're going to discuss 40 years of India's sensational victory over the West Indies in the 1983 World Cup. But I was in that, I went to cover that tournament. And when we first went to England and applied for accreditation, we did not get accreditation for Lords. because MCC is a private club, and they said there is the
Yeah.
English Cricket Board or the TCCB as it was called then, the MCC, and MCC will not give you accreditation because hey, India is not playing any match here. So what if it's the World Cup? Your team is not playing here. Only if your team is playing here, we will consider whether to give you accreditation.
Yeah.
So that's how stiff upper lip and hoity-toity the MCC can be.
Yep.
But what happened? India reached the final. So we went to, I went to apply for accreditation again, and the stewards at Grace Gates, who are, I mean, they speak in a clipped tongue, at least they used to then, and look down on you with that arched eyebrow. And one steward telling the other, oh, look, now we've got Gandhi coming to Lords. In fact, the allusion was to Gandhi, the movie made by Richard Attenborough, which was then, such a big hit globally. But that's how disdainful they could be. It was not said in jest or in fun. It was almost as, look at these guys, where have they come from? So that's how, and I thought the behavior of the MCC members against the Australian team was shocking, to say the least. For them to be almost getting mugged in the long room. So what if the decision is...
And especially Usman Khawaja and the recent report that came out about the dodgy behavior in the past about race issues, and it is a very bad look.
Yes, and we all know how, I mean, look, there are enough and more examples of racism, not just in English football, which we all know has been widely known, but also in cricket. And there are enough number of players. You can ask some of the West Indians, I mean, most famous line in West Indies cricket, which actually gave rise to the fires of Babylon, that fantastic movie that we've seen, where Tony Greig, the then England captain, 1976, he said, we'll make them grovel. When West Indies, so I mean, yes, it was a kind of a cricketing challenge, but there was also a bit of a racial slur there involved. If you look back in those times, 1976, when race relations between people of different races in England weren't really, in the best of health.
So, leaving aside the spirit discussion, what is lost in all this is a very engaging series, and one player like Ben Stokes pulled it out of the bag like he used to, but then Steve Smith, he's been there. Whenever he goes to England, it's just like a bucket full of runs for him. So he will be playing his 100th Test match, the upcoming third Test. So people now say that he's the best since Bradman, and he has an average of 60 in these conditions. It's a bowling era. But so where do you think, like, how do you assess his overall Test career now, and where do you think he'll end up?
I mean, look, this is a fantastic question, because when you go by the figures, the runs, the average, the centuries, he's just behind Bradman, as you said, or in the cluster of the top 10. 100 Test matches, 9,000 runs, 32, 33 centuries. I mean, he's a marvel. I mean, a lot of people say Ben Stokes is a freak, but Steve Smith is no less a freak, because when you watch him bat, you can't believe the guy with so many ticks and mannerisms and unsteady head. Actually, head is very steady. Apart from that's why he's such a terrific batsman, because ultimately, when you're batting, whether in defense or attack, it's how steady your head is and the balance that you have, which defines how good you are. So in that sense, if you watch him minutely, he's never losing his sense of balance or his steadiness. Just if you have to give you an example of two other players who were murderers of bowling, Viv Richards and Virendra Sehwag. Sehwag, everybody thought that, yaar, iske paas defense nahi hai, ye to kabhi bhi out ho jayega. But the guy made 8,000 plus runs.
Feet don't move, is what they said.
Viv Richards, what is this? He's hitting across the line, and he'll get out, he'll get exposed in English conditions, Australian conditions, Indian conditions. Never happened, because these guys were geniuses, and Steve Smith is a genius. The closest batsman who I find, he resembles, or somebody who resembles him, because now he's moved so far ahead of everybody else, is Pakistan's Javed Miandad, who was very fidgety. He was, kind of, and of course, street smart, which Steve Smith also is. He's a great improviser. He's a terrific improviser. And I think he'll go down in the annals of the game as certainly one of the greatest batsmen ever. Now, it's a matter of opinion. Ultimately, who's the best of all time? Only Bradman, with an average that he has, almost 100, stands apart from everybody else. But otherwise, you can take your pick.
Yeah.
No, I mean, is Sachin Tendulkar the greatest after him, or is it Brian
Yeah.
Lara, or is it Viv Richards, or is it Sunil Gavaskar, or is it Steve Smith? There's a whole array, or Kumar Sangakkara.
Yeah.
There's a whole array of
Yeah.
batsmen, Jack Hobbs, Wally Hammond. We can keep on adding names.
Yeah.
So Steve Smith, I like his batting because he makes so many runs. I don't like his batting because he's not great to watch. These are the kind of debates that will happen, you know.
Yeah. So all the names that you mentioned, I noticed that you haven't mentioned the other part of the Fab Four. So now he's pulling apart from them, and Root is playing exceptionally well, but not so much. Williamson, you can't really fault him because he doesn't get to play Test cricket much, and Kohli's been on and off. So do you think now Smith has separated himself from the pack?
I think in Test cricket he has. So I thought
Yeah.
till say about 6-8 months back that Root had pulled away and was
Yeah,
on a magnificent run spree. A little before him was Kane Williamson. Of course, Virat was going through a horror period, a lean period for
Yeah.
2.5, 3 years. But in all formats, Virat obviously still is, when you look at ODIs and T20 and Test matches, in Test he seems to have got his mojo back, though he missed out on a big
Yeah.
occasion in the WTC final. But a match before
Final,
that, he had a big 100 against Australia at home. So
Yeah.
it's still, I think the race is intense, but certainly I think, one thing about Steve Smith, look at 100 in the WTC final, 100 in this crucial match at Lord's.
Yep.
He's just rising. The big occasion seems to bring out the
Yeah.
best in him,
Big
as it does in
occasion.
Ben
Yeah.
Stokes,
Yeah.
which is why, and I
Yeah.
would even add, why only batsmen? Look at Pat Cummins. He just brings out the best in him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, ultimately, when you talk of the really great players, you have to look at how well they performed, how frequently they performed well on the big occasion. And Steve Smith seems to be doing it more often than most.
Yeah. So another point now, which we thought would be the main issue going into these Ashes, was Bazball. So now they've lost 2 out of 2, last 2. In the previous 4 matches, they've lost 3, and they won only against Ireland. So are we seeing a bit of a crack in the Bazball?
Crack, maybe a confrontation to Bazball, which they hadn't experienced for 14, 15 tests. They've run up against the best team in the world. Australia is the best team in the world I think by a long way. And though England is playing at home, they've run into an Australian team which is primed for success. They've just come. They were fresh from a victory against India. India is a very strong team also, and they clobbered India in the WTC final. But we've had 2 really good close matches. The second not as close as the first. And remember, I think the thing about Bazball is, look at it this way: before Bazball came into existence, that is when Brendan McCullam and Ben Stokes joined hands, England had won 1 out of 17 matches.
Yeah.
Before that. After that, they won, I think, 10 or 11 out of 15. They've lost the last 2 or 3. As you are 2, you mentioned here, and 1 more against New Zealand.
3 out of 4. Last 3 out of 4. Yeah.
By 1 run. Some of the matches that they've lost, like New Zealand, they lost by 1 run. The first match against Australia, they lost by 2 wickets, which they could have won, but for Pat Cummins playing a heroic knock towards the end, and so on. There is a certain, approach that they've deployed. I think sometimes it's to cover up some deficiencies that exist in their team. For instance, they don't have a really good spinner. They brought in Moeen Ali, but he was retired, for God's sake. He had given up Test cricket completely. They pulled him out of from somewhere. He was just playing white ball cricket, and they brought him in. I think the batting it was so heavily dependent on Root and on Ben Stokes. But they've got guys like Zach Crawley and Ollie Pope and Harry Brook to start. So there is something that has happened which has raised the level of performance of the England team. They've got an extension of Bazball has given Stuart Broad and James Anderson an extension of a career by a year and a half, and they one is 37, the other is 41. There's something which is happening. And look, I think the first match, it's also laced with some madness. There is josh and there's passion, all that. There's some lunacy also involved. That's also part of the charm. In the first match, the 323 he declares, with Joe Root batting. I mean, this completely turns around or overturns everything that cricket convention and tactics has told you. Had
Yep.
maybe they would have won the test match. But then the test match wouldn't have been
Yep.
so interesting. Maybe it would have just turned out into
Yep.
a dull and dreary draw. Now, of course, is
Yep.
the challenge for Bazball,
Yep.
for Brendan McCullam and Ben Stokes, because however refreshing your approach, however well you play, however the pockets, however much the individual and pockets of success you enjoy, if you keep getting beaten time and again, the fans are going to say, hey, we've had it. Then
Yeah.
how is it different from what was happening before Bazball, where we lost,
Exactly.
where we won only 1 out of 17? So I think this is going to be the challenge for Bazball. It's not in the post-match comments and
Yep.
pot shots that you can take at Australia, sporting spirit, no sportsman spirit, etc. You have to perform, you have to deliver the results, and remember they're playing at home. So there is a stiff challenge ahead of them
Yeah.
over the next 3
Yeah.
matches. The genius of Ben Stokes by himself alone is not going to deliver. They've got to have guys like Jimmy Anderson is a guy who's been below par. I think that's been a big blow.
Yeah.
They don't have a great bowling
Yeah.
attack. They don't have a great
Yeah.
spinner, as I told you. And the batting is a little bit wobbly because of the inexperience apart from Stokes and Root. So they've got challenges, serious challenges coming up.
So do you think Australia did something different to other opponents of Bazball? Like India were blown away. Other teams maybe not expecting it. But what have Australia done? Have they just gone about sensibly and waited for England to make a mistake?
I think Australia have invested very smartly and very heavily into reformatting their test match, desire. The approach may not be as spectacularly unorthodox as England's, but they thrashed England in the Ashes down under.
Yeah.
But after that, they went to Pakistan. They played really well there. They came to India. They lost the series, but they played really well.
Yeah, but they played.
And they cleverly prepared for the World Test Championship final, knowing that we are going to meet India again. And the way they beat India in terms of technique, tactics, temperament was remarkable to watch. And they've taken that agenda forward. They've got spectacular players in their fold also. I mean, David Warner, if he gets going, is no less than any batsman that England possesses today. But they've got a terrific bowling attack. Now, of course, they've lost Nathan Lyon, so that's going to be a bit of a hardship for them too. But overall, man for man, I think they're a stronger team. And ultimately, you can get Bazball or whatever, the approach can give you these, spikes. But if the team is not as strong, then you're going to run into trouble, and I think that's what is happening with Bazball. I would be delighted to be proved wrong, because I think the series so far has been very engaging. And if England win a match, at least one match, the next match, the series just will come alive dramatically. But Australia at the moment look a far stronger team in all departments of the game.
So you said this is a very exciting Ashes series. So last question I ask, what's the prediction? Can England come back?
I mean, they're playing at home, so you must give them, they have hope, and they've got. I think, look, one of the virtues of Bazball is that it seems to me it's a very optimistic approach. That whatever our limitations, but we will play to potential and maybe a little beyond, and then we will. And the element of surprise is what I think surprised many teams before. Earlier when they played, they whitewashed New Zealand. They lost a match to South Africa but won the series. They beat India, a strong Indian team, in England last year, and they squared the series. And I think the most remarkable was beating Pakistan 3-0. Whitewashing Pakistan had never happened. No team had done it earlier. And they did it with smart batting, terrific, aggressive cricket.
And they played for the win, but those were roads in Pakistan. They were inevitably end up in draws, like what you used to see when Australia went there. So they played for the win, and that was very exciting.
They made challenging declarations. They made really... So it's loaded with optimism, but as I said, also laced with some lunacy. Now, whether the answer is in reducing the lunacy and increasing the optimism but I think they need to have far more consistency. I mean, even in the Lord's match, they lost wickets in a heap trying to counter the short ball theory by the Aussies by playing outrageous strokes. Sometimes Test cricket demands that you go entire session without scoring too many runs. That can happen. That's a tactic. To try and overturn that tactic, you might end up losing the match, which is what happened, I think. So both these Test matches, they weren't too far, but they weren't there. At the end of the day, it's Cummins who won the match, or Australia who won the match.
Yeah. So anyway, we just hope that the rest of the series is as exciting And we hope everything remains on the field and not off it and doesn't get ugly. So that's the end of the discussion for today. This was the first episode of Sportsroom with Ayaz Memon. And please like the video, only if you like the video. And we'll catch you soon with episode 2. Bye.
Thank you, Anirudh. We'll catch up again.